The sun rose slowly over the vast expanse of the frontier, casting golden light over the endless fields of dry grass and the distant mountains that marked the edge of the horizon. The lone rancher woke to the sound of wind rustling through the old wooden beams of his cabin. Life on the frontier was never easy, but he had learned to find comfort in its solitude. The small cabin he had built with his own hands stood as a testament to his resilience and independence. Each morning, he would step outside, stretch his stiff muscles, and breathe in the crisp, fresh air that carried the scent of wild sage and distant pine. He was a man of few words, accustomed to living alone. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the sound of his own voice often startled him. His days were filled with the hard work of maintaining the ranch, mending fences that the storms had damaged, tending to his small herd of cattle, and ensuring that water troughs never ran dry. Every task required effort and patience, yet he took pride in his ability to survive in a land that demanded both. Despite the loneliness, there was a rhythm to his life, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his labor sustained him and kept him connected to the land he loved. One morning, as he rode along the dusty trail that bordered the river, he noticed movement along the riverbank that made him pause. A tall figure stood there, bending down to collect something from the ground. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her height was remarkable, towering over the young trees that lined the river. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a calmness in the way she moved, a careful grace that spoke of someone intimately familiar with the land. Her hair, long and dark, caught the sunlight as she turned her head, and her eyes, sharp and observant, seemed to notice everything around her. Curiosity stirred within the rancher. He had heard tales from travelers and neighboring settlers about the Apache people who lived nearby, but he had never seen them up close. He watched from a distance, careful not to disturb her, yet unable to look away. She appeared to be gathering herbs, perhaps for food or for healing purposes. Occasionally, she would pause and scan the horizon, her posture alert, as if she were aware of every sound in the wilderness. There was something remarkable about her, not just her height or her strength, but the quiet confidence she carried. Over the next few days, their paths began to cross more frequently. The rancher would see her early in the morning, moving along the riverbank, and sometimes she would be near the edge of the forest, hunting small game or collecting water. Each encounter was brief, but they exchanged small gestures of acknowledgement, a nod, a brief smile, a shared look that carried understanding without words. Though they came from different worlds, a silent connection began to form. The rancher began to admire her resourcefulness. She moved through the wilderness with ease, finding food, water, and shelter where others might struggle. He observed the way she handled a bow, her movements precise and practiced, honed by years of experience and survival. There was a quiet strength about her that was impossible to ignore. He realized that life had given him a rare opportunity to learn from someone so skilled and attuned to the natural world. One day, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind picked up, carrying a chill that cut through the rancher's coat. He was out checking the cattle when he saw her struggling against the gusts near the river. Without hesitation, he rode toward her, shouting to be heard over the roar of the wind. She turned, her eyes wide with surprise, but she did not hesitate to move toward his cabin, where he could offer shelter. Together, they raced against the storm, navigating the uneven ground, the mud, and the slippery rocks. Once inside the cabin, he helped her dry off and offered her a warm meal of bread and stew. She accepted quietly, but her eyes betrayed a mix of gratitude and curiosity. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain pounding against the roof, the sound mingling with the occasional crack of thunder. In that quiet moment, the rancher realized that he had never shared his space with anyone before. The presence of another human being, especially someone so strong and independent, felt both unfamiliar and comforting. They began to talk, slowly at first. Language was a barrier, as she spoke her own tongue, and he spoke only English. Yet, through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and patient explanations, they began to understand each other. He learned that she was knowledgeable about plants and animals, and she discovered that he could teach her certain skills with tools and machinery that were foreign to her. There was a mutual exchange of knowledge, a way of connecting that transcended words. As days turned into weeks, their interactions became a part of his daily routine. He looked forward to her visits, not just for the practical help she provided, but for the companionship that had slowly become a source of comfort. The frontier was a lonely place, and in her presence, he found a sense of shared experience, a recognition that someone else understood the challenges and beauty of living close to the land. He also began to notice small, personal details about her. The way she laughed when something amused her, a sound that was rare and precious. The way her eyes lit up when she found a particular herb or a hidden stream of water. The quiet determination in her voice when she explained a method of survival, even if he only partially understood the words. Each detail added to the growing respect and admiration he felt, and he realized that his feelings were more complex than mere friendship. Despite their differences, there was a rhythm to their companionship, a balance that neither had expected. He respected her independence, her skill, and her strength, and she respected his perseverance, knowledge of the land, and quiet nature. Together, they formed an unspoken partnership, built on trust, curiosity, and the shared experience of surviving in a world that was often unforgiving. The rancher also began to reflect on his own life. He had always valued solitude, believing it to be necessary for survival, yet he recognized now that human connection brought its own form of strength. The Apache girl was not just a companion. She was a mirror, reflecting back his own resilience and capacity for care. In her presence, he felt a deeper sense of purpose, a motivation to protect and nurture not just the land and his livestock, but the fragile bond that had grown between them. By the end of the month, the frontier no longer felt quite so vast and empty. The rancher had discovered that life could hold unexpected moments of connection, and that sometimes, the people who seemed most different from us could teach us the greatest lessons. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for learning and growth. And as he watched her walk along the riverbank one evening, the sun setting behind her and casting a golden glow over the land, he knew that his life had changed in ways he could not yet fully understand. The first part of their story ended not with dramatic events, but with quiet recognition. Two people, each strong in their own right, finding in each other a companion who made the struggles of frontier life a little less lonely, a little more meaningful. The bond was fragile, like the first sprouts of green in spring, yet full of promise. The rancher knew that this was only the beginning of something profound, a journey that would test their resilience, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately teach them both what it truly meant to rely on another person. And so, life on the frontier continued, with the wind blowing through the tall grass, the sun rising and setting over the mountains, and two people, from different worlds, learning to walk together along the uncertain paths of life. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the lone rancher and the Apache girl grew stronger. Their friendship had started with cautious curiosity, but now it was rooted in mutual respect and shared experiences. Each day, they learned more about each other, discovering strengths, habits, and ways of seeing the world that were completely different yet strangely complementary. Life on the frontier was challenging, and they both realized that having someone who understood even part of their daily struggle made the hardships more bearable. The rancher's life, once defined by solitude, now had moments of laughter and conversation. Even though language remained a partial barrier, gestures, shared tasks, and patient explanations created a bridge between them. He taught her how to repair broken fences, mend tools, and manage the cattle during long, hot days. In return, she showed him how to identify edible plants, track animals, and move silently through the forest without startling the wildlife. He admired her skill and attention to detail, marveling at how someone so young could survive in the wilderness with such confidence. On one warm afternoon, the rancher followed her to a small clearing near the river. She pointed to different plants, explaining their uses with gestures and broken English words she had learned. He knelt beside her, carefully examining each leaf and root, realizing that much of what he had thought he knew about survival was still limited. She showed him how to make simple remedies from herbs to soothe cuts or stomach pains, and even how to find water by noticing the subtle signs in the soil and vegetation. The rancher listened intently, feeling a deep respect for her knowledge and a growing admiration for her intelligence. Their friendship also brought moments of lightness. They would play small games to pass the time, such as racing along the riverbank or seeing who could climb a tree faster. Sometimes, they would share meals together, sitting quietly by the fire, letting the warmth of the flames and the companionship fill the silence. These moments, simple and ordinary, became treasures for the rancher. He realized that even in a harsh and unforgiving land, human connection could provide comfort and joy. One morning, the rancher noticed signs of trouble on his ranch. A group of settlers had arrived nearby, and they were wary of outsiders, especially those from the Apache community. Rumors and fear spread quickly among the small frontier settlements, and soon he heard whispers about his friendship with the Apache girl. Some neighbors suggested he should distance himself from her, warning that associating too closely could bring trouble. At first, he felt a pang of doubt. He knew the world around him could be harsh and unforgiving, and he feared that his bond with her might create problems he was not prepared to face. Despite the warnings, he continued to meet her in secret, drawn by the trust and understanding they had built. She, too, faced pressure from her own community. Some of the Apache elders worried about her spending so much time with a settler. They reminded her of the dangers, of the traditions and customs that had guided their people for generations. Yet, she found herself drawn to the rancher's quiet strength and the knowledge that he treated her with respect and kindness. Slowly, she began to trust him in ways she had not trusted anyone outside her tribe. Their bond deepened one evening when the frontier sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. The rancher had been working long hours to repair a section of fence damaged by a recent storm. The Apache girl arrived, carrying a basket of freshly gathered herbs and berries. She offered them to him, a simple gesture, yet filled with meaning. He accepted, feeling a warmth that went beyond the physical act of sharing food. Sitting together on a log, they talked, or rather communicated in gestures, shared smiles and broken words, about the day, their work, and the little discoveries that had made life on the frontier bearable. In those quiet moments, the rancher began to notice more personal qualities about her. Her laughter, soft and genuine, had a way of lifting his spirits even after a long, exhausting day. Her patience amazed him. She would spend hours showing him how to tie knots, prepare food, or move quietly through the forest, never showing frustration when he struggled to keep up. He realized that she had a quiet courage, facing challenges every day that most people could not imagine. Her strength was not only physical but also emotional, and it inspired him to become better in his own life. The Apache girl, in turn, noticed the rancher's determination and resilience. She admired his ability to face the harsh conditions of the land without complaint. Even though he was used to being alone, he treated her as an equal, listening, learning, and respecting her knowledge. She felt safe around him, a rare and valuable feeling in a world where danger often lurked. Slowly, she began to rely on him in ways that went beyond survival, finding comfort in his presence and guidance. One afternoon, they faced a real test together. A fire had started on the outskirts of the ranch, likely from lightning striking a dry patch of grass. The flames spread quickly, and the wind carried sparks toward the cabin and the nearby cattle. The rancher acted quickly, rounding up the animals and moving them to safety, while she helped him guide the frightened creatures through the smoke. They worked side by side, calling to the animals, calming them, and doing everything they could to prevent a disaster. By the time the fire was finally under control, both were exhausted, covered in soot, and breathing heavily. But there was a shared sense of accomplishment. The event strengthened their trust in each other, proving that together they could face even the most dangerous situations. After the fire, they sat together by the river, watching the smoke rise in the distance. Neither spoke much, but their shared silence was full of understanding. They had survived the immediate danger, and in doing so, they had learned more about each other's character than any words could convey. The rancher realized that the Apache girl had become an indispensable part of his life. He trusted her judgment, relied on her skill, and valued her companionship more than he had ever expected. As the seasons changed, their bond continued to grow. Winter brought snow and bitter cold. Testing their endurance and resourcefulness, they would spend long hours indoors, maintaining the cabin and preparing supplies for the harsh months ahead. During these times, conversation became more frequent. They shared stories about their pasts. Although much of it was communicated through drawings, gestures, and limited words, the rancher spoke of his family, the ranch he had inherited, and the lessons he had learned from the land. The Apache girl shared tales of her people, their customs, and the wisdom passed down from her elders. Each story deepened their understanding of one another, building a connection that went beyond mere friendship. Through all of these experiences, they began to realize that their bond was rare and precious. It was not just about survival or companionship. It was about learning from one another, respecting each other's strengths, and finding joy in shared moments. The rancher, who had once believed solitude was his only refuge, now understood the value of trust and friendship. The Apache girl, who had often faced suspicion and fear from outsiders, found a safe space where she could be herself and share her knowledge. Together, they discovered a balance that neither had expected, a rhythm to life that made the hardships of the frontier more bearable and even meaningful. By the time spring returned to the plains, the rancher and the Apache girl had become inseparable in their daily routines. They continued to work, explore, and face challenges together. Yet now there was an added layer of understanding and affection. Their partnership was quiet and steady, built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared appreciation for the land and life they were shaping together. They were no longer simply two individuals surviving the frontier. They were companions, each helping the other to grow stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And so, life went on, with the rancher and the Apache girl facing the daily challenges of the wilderness side by side. Their connection was subtle but undeniable, built not on words alone but on actions, shared experiences, and the quiet understanding that comes from walking the same difficult path together. It was a bond that promised growth, learning, and the possibility of a shared future, a rare treasure in the unpredictable and often harsh world of the frontier. Spring was fading, and the days were growing warmer. The rancher and the Apache girl had settled into a comfortable rhythm, sharing the labor and the small joys of frontier life. Yet, with the warmth of the season, came new challenges. The frontier was never a forgiving place, and with every season came a reminder that life was unpredictable, sometimes harsh, and always demanding. The rancher had begun to notice changes in the behavior of the settlers who lived nearby. At first, it was small things. Curious glances from a distance, whispers that ceased when he approached, and the cautious way some would nod or shake their heads as they passed by. He had grown used to solitude, yet the presence of other people now seemed fraught with tension. The Apache girl sensed it too. Though she spoke little about it, the subtle anxiety in her movements betrayed her awareness of the unease surrounding them. One afternoon, while tending to the cattle, the rancher overheard a group of settlers talking in low voices near the edge of the woods. They spoke of his friendship with the Apache girl, expressing suspicion and distrust. Some hinted that it was dangerous to associate so closely with someone outside their own community. Their words carried warnings and veiled threats, a reminder that in the frontier, prejudice and fear often ruled interactions between different peoples. The rancher's stomach tightened as he listened. He had always relied on his independence, but now he realized that human judgment and fear could threaten even the strongest bonds. The Apache girl, too, faced pressure from her own community. She had been warned by elders to keep a distance from the settlers, to be wary of their intentions. Her people had long memories, and the history of mistrust and conflict ran deep. Yet, she could not ignore the connection she had formed with the rancher. He had shown her respect, kindness, and an understanding of the land that was rare among outsiders. She struggled with the conflicting messages, torn between loyalty to her people and the bond she had formed with him. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the plains, The rancher and the Apache girl faced an unexpected test. A severe storm had rolled in suddenly, dark clouds blotting out the fading light, and gusts of wind bending the tall grass. The river, normally calm, began to swell, and he realized that the heavy rain could endanger both his cabin and the cattle. Without hesitation, he called out to her, and together they worked to secure the animals and reinforce the fences. The storm raged for hours, lightning flashing across the sky and thunder shaking the earth, yet they moved with a quiet coordination that spoke of trust and understanding. During the storm, a tree struck by lightning fell dangerously close to the cabin. They acted quickly, dragging it away from the building and securing it so that it would not roll further. Each movement required cooperation, strength, and careful timing. The rancher felt a surge of admiration for her courage. She did not flinch, did not complain, and moved with purpose and precision, even when the wind threatened to knock them off balance. He realized that their bond was not just emotional, but practical. Together, they could face dangers that would have overwhelmed either of them alone. After the storm passed, they sat together on the porch, damp and exhausted, watching the water recede from the river and the clouds slowly drift away. They did not speak much, but their shared silence was rich with meaning. The storm had tested them both, revealing not only their physical strength but also their emotional resilience. In facing the danger together, they had learned more about each other than any conversation could convey. The rancher felt a deep sense of trust, knowing that in times of danger, she would be by his side, just as he would be by hers. The tension from the outside world did not abate, however. Rumors and suspicion continued to spread among the settlers, and the rancher began to sense a growing unease in the local community. One day, while repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, he saw a group of men approaching. Their faces were stern, their expressions wary. They spoke cautiously, asking questions about his friendship with the Apache girl. Some of their words were polite, but their tone carried an unmistakable edge of warning. They implied that continuing the relationship could bring trouble, that it might put both him and the girl in danger. The rancher listened calmly, though his heart pounded. He knew that his choices could have consequences, not only for himself but for her as well. He had come to care deeply for her, but the weight of social expectation and fear threatened to undermine the connection they had built. Still, he refused to be swayed by threats or gossip. He had learned long ago that life on the frontier required courage, and protecting the people he valued was a responsibility he would not take lightly. The Apache girl noticed the tension in his demeanor and placed a hand on his arm, a silent gesture of reassurance. She understood that the challenges they faced were not merely external but also internal, testing their resolve and the strength of their bond. They shared a look that spoke volumes, a mixture of determination, concern, and the quiet understanding that they would face the difficulties together. One afternoon, the rancher suggested that they take a walk through the forest to clear their minds. The Apache girl agreed, and together they moved along a narrow path, the sunlight filtering through the canopy above. As they walked, they discussed their plans for the ranch, the cattle, and the coming season. They also shared stories from their pasts, carefully bridging the gaps in language with gestures, drawings in the dirt, and a patience born of necessity. Each step deepened their understanding of one another, reinforcing the trust and respect that had become the foundation of their relationship. During their walk, they encountered signs of wildlife that reminded them of the ever-present dangers of the wilderness. Tracks of predators, broken branches, and distant calls all spoke of a world that demanded constant vigilance. The Apache girl explained how to read these signs, pointing out subtle clues in the environment that the rancher might have overlooked. He listened intently, absorbing her knowledge and realizing that her skill was not only impressive but essential for their survival. Together, they interpreted the signs and adjusted their plans, demonstrating a partnership that balanced experience, intelligence, and intuition. The following weeks brought more challenges. A neighboring rancher accused the lone rancher of trespassing. Though no evidence supported the claim, he had to spend long hours resolving disputes, reinforcing boundaries, and maintaining the peace. The Apache girl helped when she could, guiding him to resources, advising on practical solutions, and offering quiet support. Their cooperation became a model of teamwork, showing that mutual respect and understanding could overcome even the most difficult obstacles. Through these trials, they also began to understand the deeper emotions that connected them. It was no longer simply about survival or friendship. There was a growing awareness of care, concern, and attachment. The rancher realized that he valued her presence beyond practical reasons. He admired her courage, her skill, and her resilience. The Apache girl, in turn, recognized the quiet strength and steadfastness of the rancher, appreciating the consistency and patience he brought into her life. Together, they discovered that trust and friendship could evolve into something deeper, though neither spoke it aloud, respecting the delicate balance of their situation. One evening, after a long day of work and minor conflicts with neighbors, they sat together by the river, the sun dipping behind the horizon. The water reflected the fiery hues of the sunset, and the gentle sound of the river created a sense of calm. They shared a simple meal, bread and roasted vegetables, and allowed themselves to relax. The rancher glanced at her, noticing the way her eyes reflected the colors of the sunset, and felt a surge of gratitude for her companionship. She smiled softly, sensing his thoughts, and reached out to place a hand on his, a gesture of connection that needed no words. Despite the pressures and challenges, they had survived, strengthened by their shared experiences. They understood that the frontier would continue to test them, but now they were not alone. Together, they had faced storms, suspicion, and danger, and had come through stronger and more united. Their bond was no longer fragile. It had weathered difficulties and grown resilient, rooted in trust, respect, and the shared understanding of life on the edge of civilization. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, the rancher and the Apache girl sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the wilderness around them. Owls called from the trees, the river murmured softly, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. In that stillness, they reflected on the challenges they had faced, the lessons they had learned, and the growing connection that bound them together. The frontier remained unpredictable, but they knew that together they could face whatever came next. Side by side, with courage, trust, and a shared sense of purpose, the days grew warmer, and the wildflowers began to bloom along the riverbank and the hills surrounding the ranch. Life had settled into a rhythm for the rancher and the Apache girl, but the world outside remained unpredictable. Even with the trust and understanding they had built, both knew that their connection was delicate, shaped not only by friendship, but also by cultural expectations, traditions, and the judgments of others. Yet, they had learned to rely on one another, finding comfort and strength in their shared presence. One morning, the rancher noticed her standing by the river, her gaze focused on the water, as if searching for something unseen. He approached quietly. Careful not to startle her, she turned, and for a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was charged with unspoken feelings, a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something deeper that neither had fully named. He could see the determination in her eyes, the quiet confidence that had first drawn him to her. At the same time, he sensed a vulnerability, a gentle reminder that despite her strength, she carried fears and uncertainties like everyone else. They began to work together on the morning chores, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and checking the traps for small game. Yet, today felt different. Their movements, usually comfortable and practiced, were accompanied by a subtle awareness of each other's presence. The rancher found himself noticing the way she moved with careful grace, the strength in her hands, and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She, in turn, observed him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, appreciating the way he approached challenges with patience and resolve. After the work was done, they sat together on a fallen log, the sun warming their backs, and shared a simple meal. She handed him a piece of bread and some berries, and he offered her a small portion of cheese. There was a quiet intimacy in the act, a recognition of care and trust that went beyond words. For a long while, they simply ate in silence, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the river. It was in these small, shared moments that the depth of their bond became most apparent. The Apache girl finally broke the silence. She pointed to a spot in the soil and began to trace shapes with her finger, illustrating a concept she could not yet express fully in words. The rancher leaned in, watching carefully, trying to understand. Slowly, he realized that she was speaking of the future, of possibilities that had not yet been realized, and of a shared life built on trust and mutual respect. Her gestures, simple but deliberate, conveyed a hope that had been quietly growing between them. He felt a warmth in his chest, a recognition that the bond they had formed was not fleeting but something lasting, something worth protecting. Over the following days, they spent more time exploring the surrounding land. The Apache girl taught him how to read the subtle signs of nature, the tracks of animals, the whispers of the wind, and the patterns of the clouds that could signal changes in weather. The rancher, in turn, showed her how to build simple tools, mend fences efficiently, and plan for the coming seasons. Their lessons were not just practical. They were also ways of understanding one another, ways of sharing trust and knowledge that strengthened the connection between them. One afternoon, a moment arose that would become a turning point in their relationship. They were walking along a narrow trail near the edge of the forest when she suddenly stopped. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, and her expression was thoughtful, almost solemn. The rancher waited patiently, sensing that something important was about to be communicated. She knelt and began to draw in the dirt, her fingers moving carefully to create a simple image. A small plant, growing into a strong tree. He watched intently, trying to understand. After a moment, he realized the meaning. The plant represented trust, hope, and growth. She was telling him that their bond, fragile as it might seem to the outside world, was like a seed planted in the soil. With care, patience, and understanding, it could grow into something strong and lasting. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, recognizing the courage it took for her to express such a vulnerable idea. The gesture was both symbolic and deeply personal, a reflection of her trust and the bond they had nurtured together. The rancher responded with a gentle smile and a nod. He reached out and pressed his hand lightly over hers, a silent promise that he would nurture this bond with the same care and dedication she had shown. They remained there for a long while, sitting on the trail, watching the clouds drift across the sky and feeling the warmth of the sun. In that quiet moment, words were unnecessary. Their connection was clear, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that life was better when faced together. The days that followed were filled with small acts of care and attention. The Apache girl continued to teach him, showing him how to recognize the subtle signs of changing seasons, how to find water in unexpected places, and how to move silently through the forest. The rancher, in turn, shared his skills in managing the ranch, repairing buildings, and maintaining the safety of the animals. Each lesson, each shared task, became a symbol of their growing partnership, a reflection of the trust and admiration they had for one another. Despite the beauty of these moments, challenges still lingered. The settlers' suspicion had not disappeared, and occasional whispers reminded them that the world beyond the ranch was still unpredictable. Yet, they chose to focus on what they could control: the land, their work, and the bond they shared. They found comfort in the simple routines of daily life and in the moments of quiet understanding that required no words at all. Each day, they discovered new ways to support one another, deepening the emotional connection that had been growing since their first encounter by the river. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the rancher and the Apache girl sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the crackle of burning wood. The air was filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the world seemed to slow down around them. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, and they shared a long look, full of understanding and quiet emotion. In that moment, the rancher realized that their connection had evolved into something profound, not just friendship, but a bond rooted in trust, respect, and hope for the future. The Apache girl finally spoke, using the few English words she had learned. Her voice was soft but steady as she said, "Plant your seed." The rancher understood immediately. It was not about words alone. It was about what they represented: trust, care, and the intention to build something lasting together. He nodded, recognizing the courage it took for her to express such a thought. And he silently promised to honor it. Their bond, like the seed in the soil, would be nurtured, protected, and allowed to grow. In the days that followed, they continued their work with renewed purpose. The rancher repaired fences with careful attention, while the Apache girl guided him in understanding the land and the animals. They shared meals, laughter, and stories, strengthening the foundation of their connection. Each shared task, each quiet gesture, became a symbol of the trust they had cultivated. A reminder that even in a world of uncertainty, they had found something precious and enduring. By the end of the month, it was clear that their bond had transformed. It was no longer simply about survival or companionship. It was about hope, trust, and the shared intention to face life together. The rancher had come to rely on her presence in ways he had never imagined, and she had learned to trust him as a guide, protector, and companion. Their connection, delicate yet resilient, had become the heart of their shared experience on the frontier. As the sun set over the distant hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, they stood together by the river, feeling the cool water at their feet. The world around them was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh. Yet in that moment, they knew they were not alone. The seed had been planted, a symbol of trust, care, and the potential for growth. And as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, they understood that the journey ahead would be challenging, but that together, they could face it with courage, patience, and a shared sense of purpose. The days on the frontier grew longer and warmer, carrying with them the promise of new beginnings. The rancher and the Apache girl had faced many challenges together: storms, wild animals, and the suspicions of outsiders, but their bond had grown stronger with every trial. Life remained unpredictable, yet in the midst of uncertainty, they found strength in each other. What had started as cautious friendship had transformed into a deep connection built on trust, respect, and the shared understanding of life on the frontier. Spring had given way to early summer, and the fields around the ranch were alive with the colors of wildflowers and ripening grasses. The rancher walked through the pastures, checking the fences and ensuring the cattle were healthy. The Apache girl followed closely, helping to guide the herd and offering advice on subtle signs of illness or stress among the animals. Each day, they worked side by side, their cooperation seamless, built on months of shared experience and quiet communication. Their movements were no longer tentative. They acted with confidence, knowing each could anticipate the other's needs. After the morning chores, they rested near the river, sitting on a fallen log and watching the water sparkle in the sunlight. The Apache girl pulled out a small bundle of herbs she had gathered earlier and began sorting them carefully. The rancher watched, noticing the way her hands moved with precision and care. He realized that he had come to admire not only her skill but her patience and attention to detail. She had a calm strength that seemed to steady him, a quiet presence that made the hardships of the frontier feel lighter. They shared a simple meal, passing pieces of bread and fruit back and forth. As they ate, the rancher began to speak about his plans for the future of the ranch. He explained how he wanted to expand the pastures, improve the water system, and perhaps even plant a small garden to provide food through the harsh seasons. The Apache girl listened carefully, nodding in agreement and offering suggestions based on her knowledge of the land. Her advice was practical and insightful, reflecting a deep understanding of nature and the rhythms of the wilderness. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they decided to explore a nearby ridge that overlooked the valley. The trail was steep and rocky, but together, they moved carefully, helping each other when the path became treacherous. At the top, they paused, taking in the view. The valley stretched out before them, green and alive, dotted with grazing cattle and wildflowers swaying in the breeze. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder of the beauty and possibility in the world they shared. The rancher turned to the Apache girl, noticing the way her eyes reflected the sunlight and the pride she took in the land they had worked to care for. He felt a surge of emotion, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that he could not fully put into words. She met his gaze and smiled softly, a gesture that spoke of mutual understanding and shared hope. In that moment, it became clear that the connection between them had evolved into something enduring, a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and the quiet promise of a future together. Over the next few weeks, they focused on strengthening the ranch and preparing for the coming months. Together, they repaired fences, cleared brush, and tended to the cattle. The Apache girl taught the rancher new ways to find food and water, to read the signs of nature, and to anticipate changes in the weather. He, in turn, showed her how to manage the farm more efficiently, repair tools, and plan for the long-term needs of the land and animals. Each day was filled with work, yet also with laughter, conversation, and the shared satisfaction of accomplishments achieved together. One evening, as the sun began to set, the rancher suggested they sit by the river and rest. The water glistened in the fading light, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers. They shared a quiet meal, and for a while, neither spoke, content to simply be in each other's presence. Then the Apache girl reached into her bundle and pulled out a small plant she had nurtured from a seed she had found months before. She handed it to the rancher, her eyes shining with meaning. He understood immediately. The plant was a symbol, a representation of the trust, care, and bond they had cultivated over the months. It was a living reminder of the seed she had spoken of before, now grown into something tangible. He took the plant carefully, feeling the weight of its significance. Together, they planted it near the cabin, in a spot where it would grow strong and healthy. As they pressed the soil around it, they shared a quiet smile, knowing that this simple act reflected the growth of their relationship and the hope for a shared future. Days passed, and the seasons continued to change. Summer brought long, hot days, perfect for working in the fields and exploring the surrounding land. The rancher and the Apache girl continued to face small challenges, storms, sick animals, and occasional encounters with suspicious neighbors, but each challenge only strengthened their bond. They relied on each other, sharing knowledge, supporting one another, and finding comfort in the quiet moments between work and responsibility. One afternoon, while tending the garden they had planted together, the Apache girl spoke softly. Her words were careful, deliberate, as if testing the waters of possibility. She spoke of hopes for the future, of continued partnership, and of the joy they had found in working and living together. The rancher listened intently, understanding the depth of her feelings and realizing that his own feelings mirrored hers. There was no rush, no pressure, just the quiet acknowledgement that their bond had grown into something strong and lasting. As summer began to fade into early autumn, the rancher reflected on all they had achieved together. The land was thriving, the cattle were healthy, and the cabin and fences were well maintained. More importantly, their bond had become unshakable. They had faced danger, suspicion, and the uncertainty of the frontier. Yet they had come through stronger and more united. The Apache girl had become an integral part of his life, not only as a companion and helper, but as someone who had taught him the true meaning of trust, patience, and shared purpose. One crisp autumn morning, they stood together on the porch, looking out over the valley. The colors of the leaves were brilliant, painting the landscape in shades of gold, red, and orange. The rancher reached out, taking her hand gently in his, and she responded with a quiet squeeze, a gesture full of meaning. Neither needed to speak. Their bond, nurtured through months of shared work, trust, and understanding, was evident in the simple act of holding hands. The Apache girl smiled and gestured toward the small tree they had planted months before. It had grown strong and healthy, its roots firmly anchored in the soil. It was a living symbol of their journey, a reflection of the trust and care they had invested in one another. The rancher nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and hope. Together, they had built not only a life on the land but also a connection that would endure, capable of withstanding the uncertainties of the world beyond the ranch. As evening fell, they prepared a small fire by the river. The sky was painted in soft shades of purple and pink, and the stars began to appear one by one. They sat together, sharing a simple meal and enjoying the quiet beauty of the world around them. The sound of the river, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the warmth of the fire created a sense of peace and contentment. In each other's presence, they found not only companionship, but a sense of home. A feeling that the frontier was no longer a lonely, challenging place, but a space of possibility, hope, and shared purpose. By the time the first frost of autumn arrived, the rancher and the Apache girl had settled into a life of quiet happiness. Their days were filled with work, laughter, and shared moments of reflection. They continued to face the occasional challenge, yet their bond had grown resilient, a foundation strong enough to endure the tests of the frontier. The rancher knew that the future would hold uncertainties, but he also knew that with the Apache girl by his side, they could face anything together. In the final weeks before winter, they took a walk along the riverbank, reflecting on the months they had spent together. They spoke of dreams, of continued growth, and of the life they hoped to build together. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared recognition that their connection was rare and precious. As the sun set behind the distant hills, they paused, taking in the beauty of the valley and the strength of their shared bond. The journey that had begun with curiosity and cautious friendship had evolved into something profound. The rancher and the Apache girl had planted a seed of trust, nurtured it through shared experience, and watched it grow into a bond that promised hope, companionship, and resilience. They had faced challenges, survived storms, and overcome suspicion, and through it all, they had found strength in one another. As night fell and the stars shone brightly above the frontier, they sat together near the river, holding hands and feeling the quiet power of their connection. The land around them was vast and unpredictable. Yet, in each other, they had found stability, trust, and hope. The seed they had planted, both literal and symbolic, had grown into something strong and enduring. A reminder that even in the harshest conditions, care, patience, and mutual respect could create something beautiful and lasting. And so, life continued on the frontier. The rancher and the Apache girl faced the coming seasons together, their bond stronger than ever. They had built a home, nurtured a connection, and discovered the meaning of shared purpose. The future was uncertain, as it always had been, but together, they were ready to face it, side by side, with courage, trust, and hope.